Dear daughter, I'm writing this as a journal entry, because what I'm about to share might be the key for you to avoid repeating my mistakes. What seems small can grow into something much larger, and I want you to be prepared. It was just any ordinary afternoon when life felt peaceful. We went to the cafe we always liked. He smiled and we talked about simple things. The weather, our plans. And then, I said something that should have been normal. No, not today. Simple, without drama, an honest response. And he went silent. A heavy silence. Not the kind that brings reflection, but the kind that makes the air feel thick, almost oppressive. I felt my heart race. The sensation that something was wrong began to consume me. What should have been a light conversation had shifted in tone. I questioned myself. What did I do wrong? For a moment, I thought he just needed a minute. But the truth is, in that silence, I realized it wasn't his words that were the problem. It was the weight he placed on my no. In that moment, I didn't feel free. I felt watched, as if I had made a mistake simply by setting a boundary. I decided to try to fix it. I'm just tired. It's been a long day. It's nothing personal. I was born to offer apologies for a right I had. And so it began. A small apology, a concession here and there. And each time that pattern became more familiar. Each no I uttered brought a silence that made me feel I needed to pay for it. This wasn't love. It was conditioning. The first time this happens, it feels like just an isolated incident. But then, the cycle repeats. Each refusal creates distance, a silent gesture that echoes in a haunting way. And then, the question that haunts me is, when did I start accepting less? If you ever feel that your no leads to indifference, know this. That is not love. It's a trap. Remember this. If your no cost you your peace, the person next to you is not safe for your heart. And if I could go back and correct that moment, I would say, I have the right to say no, and I won't be punished for it. Simple and straightforward. That's the rule. There's no room for confusion. Instead of seeking acceptance, seek respect. When I said no, it wasn't just a word. It was a small manifesto, an act of resistance against the need to please, to be accepted at the cost of myself. But in that cafe, amid the heavy and dense air, I realized that resistance could also be solitary. It was as if the space between us had expanded, and I was floating in a void, unsure of how to anchor myself. There was a part of me that wanted to scream, but an inner voice whispered, "Don't make a scene." And that voice was familiar, like a song that plays repeatedly on the radio, wrapped in promises of love. But love shouldn't leave scars. Love shouldn't make you doubt your own truth. His silence began to feel more like manipulation than a reflective pause. I remember looking out the cafe window, watching people pass by, each trapped in their own conversations, their own worlds. And there I was, stuck in a bubble of uncertainty. Have you ever felt like the air is so thick that you can hardly breathe? That was the feeling that dominated that moment. As the sun poured in through the windows, warming my skin, my heart felt frozen. In that instant, I wondered if he truly understood what it meant to hear a no, or if, for him, it was just a word that needed to be undone, an obstacle to be overcome. And as I forced myself to retreat, to soften, I was allowing him to shape how I viewed love. It wasn't a healthy exchange, but a strange dance where I struggled not to step on his toes. While he dictated the rhythm, a new emotion began to creep in. Anger, not at him, but at myself for letting this happen. A quiet anger, like a fire smoldering beneath the surface. I wanted him to see, to feel my pain, but instead, I was just becoming invisible. And when silence became routine, I learned to dance to the music he chose. What should have been a dialogue turned into a monologue from him, and I was just a spectator. Then one day I was watching a movie alone. An ordinary scene, a woman telling someone who didn't respect her, "You can't just silence my voice." And the words resonated within me. That was it. What I was living wasn't a safe love, but a prison with open doors. I allowed myself to feel helpless. And finally, the anger transformed into clarity. This was the key I had lost. I decided to use this clarity to formulate new words, new rules. I built a mantra in my mind, something that made sense. My no matters. My space is sacred. I started to practice. In the mirror, I said, I have the right to express my boundaries, and they are priceless. When I met him again, the tension was there, but this time I was no longer willing to give in. He asked about future plans, but before I could let myself be carried away by expectation, I took a deep breath and said, "I don't know if I can commit to anything right now. I need time." The silence returned, but this time I didn't feel afraid. I felt powerful. What happened next was revealing. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and a new silence settled in, but it wasn't oppressive. It was a space where I could breathe. He didn't know how to respond, and that, in itself, was a response. From that moment on, I realized that true love shouldn't create confusion but clarity. Freedom lay in the small things, in the simple moments when I didn't have to apologize for being who I am. If he couldn't understand that, then it was time to consider what I truly deserved. If loving means giving space for the other to grow, then I was ready to cultivate my own garden, without excuses, without resentment. If you ever find yourself lost in this emotional maze, know that it's your right to assert yourself. Love should be solid ground, where both can walk side by side without fear of stumbling. If you remember one thing, remember this: your no should never carry a weight. It is light, free, and powerful. It's a sign of respect for yourself and for the other. And so, as I left the cafe that day, a shadow of hope began to bloom. The path was still uncertain, but the direction was clear. What once seemed small had become monumental, and I was finally ready to find myself. As I walked out of the cafe, the gentle breeze brushed against my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of relief. It was as if each step I took released me from an invisible weight that had been carried for so long. The voices around me blended into a distant murmur, and I allowed myself to feel the freedom of that sunny morning. But as the adrenaline of courage faded, a shadow of doubt began to creep in. What if I was wrong? What if his silence wasn't just confusion, but a sign that he no longer cared? Every thought was an echo of the insecurities I was trying to leave behind. I knew that dance, the inner voice that kept reminding me of the moments when rejection cut deep. Memories came as flashes. Other conversations, other silences. There were times when I felt so small, almost invisible, like the last leaf clinging to a tree in autumn. I recalled the time he dismissed my opinion on something important to me, as if my words were dry leaves being carried away by the wind. "It doesn't matter," he had said with a gesture, and I let it slide, trying to convince myself it was just a phase. The truth is that in that moment at the cafe, something shifted within me. It wasn't just about saying no, or demanding respect. It was about claiming my place in the world. I didn't want to feel like a spectator in my own life anymore. So, as I walked, the feelings intertwined. Hope, fear, anger, and anxiety. An emotional storm that could turn any moment of clarity into fog. I stopped on a bench, watched the city's movement, and took a deep breath. I decided I needed a space just for myself, without noise, without pressure. The idea of a retreat, even if brief, sounded tempting. A place where I could really listen to myself, not the voice that always sought to please, but the other one, the genuine one, that knew what it wanted and didn't hesitate to ask. My thoughts wandered to places I could go, a cabin in the mountains perhaps, or a secluded beach where the only sound would be the water crashing against the rocks. Immediately the desire to escape overwhelmed me, but soon a new worry surfaced. What about him? Would he understand the need for that space? I remembered the expression on his face when I mentioned the idea of taking some time just for myself, and a dark cloud hovered over the light that was beginning to shine. He had shown discomfort, a shadow of possessiveness sneaking into his eyes, as if I were challenging a silent pact. Love shouldn't be like this, I thought. It shouldn't be a bargain that demanded emotional concessions at every turn. I stood up, determined not to let doubts consume me. I wasn't asking for much, just a little space to grow. But that old insecurity still whispered, "You're being selfish." Internal conflicts were like sharp knives sliding through my mind, hurting me as I struggled against self-criticism. But then I remembered something essential. Respecting my boundaries wasn't selfish. It was self-protection. In light of that, I felt a new determination arise, as if I were planting a seed in fertile soil. I was ready to cultivate that safe space where I could thrive, no matter how he reacted. If true love isn't afraid of distance, it should also not fear individual growth. With that in mind, I decided to call a friend, someone who understood the complexity of everything I was going through. When she answered, Her voice was warm and welcoming. I began to share everything: the coffee, the silence, the new perspective that was starting to take shape inside me. Every word I spoke felt like a new brick in the construction of a safe space. She listened attentively, and the empathy in her voice made me feel seen. In that moment, I realized I wasn't alone. There were other women facing the same challenges, the same dilemmas, and together we could exchange experiences, offer support, and find strength in our stories. After the conversation, something inside me calmed. A new understanding began to take shape. I didn't need to have all the answers right now. The road ahead would be long, perhaps filled with obstacles, but the choice to honor myself was already a significant step. And if he couldn't understand that, maybe it was time to rethink our connection. I left the bench and continued my walk. The sun was still shining, and the city carried on with its frenetic pace. But for the first time, I was aware of my own rhythm. I was reminded that love should be a space for growth, a constant dialogue where both people can be who they truly are, without fear of being silenced. As I moved away from the cafe, a new certainty took hold. I am ready to face whatever comes my way. My no is not only free, it's a cry of life. It's resistance against oppression, a promise that I will always stay true to myself. Challenges are still ahead, but now, I do not fear what lies ahead. I am here, I am alive, and I am learning to be myself. As I walked through the streets, a new understanding was taking shape within me. I was not just freeing myself from invisible chains, but rediscovering my identity. Each step felt more solid, as if the ground beneath my feet had gained texture and significance. The noise of the city, which once overwhelmed me, now sounded like a vibrant symphony. Yet, in the back of my mind, a persistent doubt lingered. Was this enough? The internal transformation I was experiencing contrasted with the external reality that had yet to change. The smile I wore to cover the wounds of the past began to feel like a heavy burden. I looked at the shop windows, reflecting my own face. The woman I saw there bore marks, scars from battles not fought, but she also had courage. I decided to enter a nearby bookstore, a refuge that always made me feel safe. The scent of new and old books was comforting, almost like a hug. I walked between the shelves, touching the covers, seeking some truth in the words that might resonate with my dilemma. In a corner, I spotted a book with a simple cover, but it radiated a familiar energy. I picked it up and began to flip through the pages. It was an anthology of stories about women who rise again after deep falls. One passage in particular caught my attention. It spoke about the difficulty of rebuilding from ruins, and how often what seems like a weakness can transform into the greatest strength. The words seemed to echo within me, stitching together a new understanding of my own journey. As I read, I realized I wasn't alone in this quest. Others had faced similar challenges, and their resilience became a map I could follow. I was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears began to slip down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. From that moment on, everything seemed clearer. This struggle wasn't just mine. It was universal. I understood that by sharing my story, by exposing my vulnerabilities, I could not only heal myself, but inspire others to do the same. I left the bookstore with the book in hand and a new purpose pulsing within me. If I could use my voice to help someone avoid the same mistakes, then those moments of pain would have been worthwhile. I remembered my conversations with my friend, how her words had been a beacon in the midst of the storm. Now, I wanted to do the same for anyone who needed to hear that wounds can teach, that boundaries are powerful, and that self-respect is an act of supreme love. As I walked home, I envisioned a circle of women gathered together, sharing their stories, laughing and crying together, a safe space where silence wouldn't be a weapon, but an invitation to reflection and mutual strengthening. I felt a spark of excitement. Perhaps my journey was not just about finding myself, but about building connections. The idea of a meeting beckoned to me like a bright possibility. What started as a tense no could transform into a resonant yes, filled with empathy and solidarity. With each step, the weight I once felt began to shift into lightness. Smiling, I looked up at the sky. The clouds had dissipated, leaving only a vibrant blue. I was ready for this new phase, where being myself would mean embracing both the light and the darkness. And so, with every breath, I reaffirmed my commitment to honor my space, while also opening doors for other women to thrive as well. This is where my new journey begins. Not just in search of love and respect, but in action, creating a legacy of strength.